you ever felt invisible? Like your prayers rise but receive no answer? Like you are calling out to heaven, but all you hear is silence? Do you feel abandoned, left behind? Like the world moves forward, but you're stuck in the same place? Let me tell you a story. There was once a man named Joseph, a dreamer full of hope, full of promise. God gave him a vision, a future of greatness, a destiny of leadership. But before the promise came, the pit. Before the dream came, the dungeon. His own brothers betrayed him, threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery. Gone was his freedom. Gone was his family. Gone were his dreams. And as he worked as a slave, as he sat in a dark prison cell, he must have wondered, has God forgotten me? Have you ever felt like Joseph, like everything was taken from you, like the dreams you once had are now just distant memories? Maybe you once believed in a future full of purpose, but now you're trapped in disappointment. Maybe you once prayed with confidence, but now you wonder if God is even listening. But listen, because Joseph's story was not over, and neither is yours. What Joseph didn't know was that in the silence, God was working. What felt like delay was actually preparation. What seemed like abandonment was actually alignment. Because in that prison, God was shaping him. Because in that suffering, God was preparing him. And one day, when the time was right, Joseph was called from the prison to the palace. From forgotten to favored. From abandoned to anointed. The years of waiting, they weren't wasted. They were the foundation for the promise. It's easy to believe in God's love when life is good. It's easy to trust Him when doors open, when prayers are answered, when blessings overflow. But what about when He is silent? What about when the answer doesn't come right away? What about when you feel alone? Listen to what God says. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. God has not forgotten you. Your name is written in His hands. Your tears are counted. Your prayers are heard. Even when you feel unseen, you are seen. Even when you feel abandoned, you are held. This isn't just Joseph's story. This is the story of countless men and women in Scripture who thought they were forgotten, only to see that God was working all along. Hannah cried out for a child, waiting in pain. Yet in time, God gave her Samuel, a prophet to the nations. David was anointed as king, but spent years hiding in caves before stepping into his calling. The Israelites endured 400 years of silence before Jesus. The Messiah arrived. Waiting is not a sign of being forgotten. It is a sign that God is preparing something greater than you can see. So now what will you do? Will you let the silence break your faith? Will you let the waiting make you bitter? Or will you hold on? Will you trust that God is working behind the scenes? Will you believe that even now, in this moment, you are not forgotten? Because the same God who remembered Joseph in the prison, the same God who remembered Hannah in her sorrow, the same God who remembered David in the wilderness, remembers you. Your name is written in His hands. Your future is already planned, and He is faithful to complete the work He started in you. But maybe you're saying, I've been waiting too long. I've prayed, I've believed, I've done everything right. And still, nothing has changed. What if the delay is not a denial? What if what feels like silence is actually the sound of God working behind the scenes? What if your season of waiting is actually your season of preparation? Because that's what happened to Joseph. Imagine Joseph, sitting in that dark prison days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into years. Had God forgotten him? Had the dream been a lie? Had he been abandoned? It must have felt that way. But what Joseph didn't realize was that even in the prison, God was preparing him for the palace. The waiting wasn't wasted. God was shaping him, teaching him wisdom, building his character, strengthening his faith. And at just the right time, in a single moment, Joseph went from prisoner to ruler. Not one step of his journey was wasted, and not one step of yours is wasted either. Maybe you feel like you're in the prison season, like you're stuck in a chapter you didn't choose, like the dream God placed in your heart is slipping away. But listen, your story is not over. Just because you can't see the ending doesn't mean God hasn't already written it. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand and I will do all that I please. God already sees your future. God already knows the victory that is coming, and He has not forgotten you. He is working, even now. But maybe you're saying, I see God blessing others, but what about me? Everyone else seems to be moving forward, but I feel stuck. Let me tell you another story. There was once a young shepherd boy named David. While his brothers were trained for war, while they stood tall in front of the prophet Samuel, David was in the fields forgotten, or so it seemed. But when God sent Samuel to anoint the next king, he didn't choose the strongest. He didn't choose the tallest. He didn't choose the most impressive. He chose the one that everyone else had overlooked. Because while others had forgotten David, God had not. You may feel unseen by people. You may feel left behind by the world, but you have never been overlooked by God. Because the same God who remembered David in the fields, who remembered Joseph in the prison, who remembered Hannah in her sorrow, remembers you. He sees you. He knows you. He is working in ways you can't yet see. What if, instead of seeing this season as a delay, you started seeing it as preparation? What if this waiting season is actually positioning you for something greater? If Joseph had never been in the prison, he would have never met the man who would introduce him to Pharaoh. If David had never been in the fields, he wouldn't have developed the skills to defeat Goliath. If Esther had never been in the palace, she wouldn't have been able to save her people. What if where you are right now is exactly where God needs you to be for the next part of your story? You might think you're behind, that life has passed you by, that God's promise is taking too long. But listen, God's timing is never early, never late, always perfect. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it lingers, wait for it, it will surely come. It will not delay. If the answer hasn't come yet, it's because the appointed time hasn't arrived. And when that moment comes, when God opens the door, when He moves in ways only He can, it will happen so fast that you'll wonder why you ever doubted, because He is faithful, and He has never forgotten you. If this message spoke to your heart, type, God has not forgotten me in the comments. Let the world know that silence does not mean abandonment. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this message with them today. Because sometimes, all we need is a reminder God is still working. The story is not over, and you are not forgotten.